Good morning. Oh, I guess I should take my notes out. First of all, thank you for inviting me, Tasha specifically, and then I'm looking around. I know many here, Carl, uh, Mr. Hawkins. Thank you for having me to speak this morning. My name is Rob Anderson. Many of you know me. I'm running for Congress, U.S. House of Representatives in Louisiana's 3rd Congressional District, which stretches from Texas over the Atchafalaya Basin, Morgan City, Lafayette, Lake Charles, Jennings, Crowley, many townships in between. I was awakened this morning, I don't know if anybody else was, by a thunderstorm. 3:30 in the morning, I live up in DeQuincy, and the rain was so hard on my roof and the thunder that it woke me up, and then it just made me think of the notes I had to write. This thunderstorm is kind of what happened to us when Donald Trump was elected and Clay Higgins was elected. This underlying tensions in our country, this push of to me, the rich against the poor, the working class against the 1%, has now come to the fore. The only legislative achievements that Clay Higgins and Donald Trump have achieved in the real world are a massive tax giveaway to the ultra wealthy. Everything else has been messaging, posturing, and virtue signal, dog whistles. And so that awakening 4 years ago is what first got me into politics. A little bit about my background: I came from the working class. I'm a former driller, home builder, concrete construction. Before that, IT, graphics. And then once my kids were off to college, and then I saw the corruption in this country, in the political system, that's when I finally got involved in politics. I stood up and said, we can't do this anymore. We have to have representatives for the people and not just the super rich. So that's how I initially got into politics. Now, how I got here was grassroots efforts to change the way politics are done by action. In my case, social media boosting and donations from just people, and no corporate backing, no lobbyist PACs, no dark money. We wanted to show by example that somebody could run for the people and that it could be done in 2020. And that has led to a massive uprising, massive fundraising where we can reach out and find out what the people of Louisiana actually want, not just what the oil and gas industry wants. And that is a push towards the 21st century, a push towards alternative fuels and better jobs for the residents of Lake Charles, Lafayette, Morgan City. A real address of coastal erosion, acknowledging that climate change is actually a thing and working to protect our homes, our farms, even our industry. Or in 50 years, there won't be a southern Louisiana. So the grassroots efforts to get us where we are only as good as your previous day's post. You have to have a plan. And our plan, our legislative action plan, is to not necessarily endorse the Green New Deal that the Democrats have put forth in Congress, but to add to it with our own take on it, which I call the GROW Act, which stands for Gulf Region Omnibus Works Act. It is a joining together of all the districts along the Gulf Coast, which tend to be the reddest and poorest districts in this country, yet it's where all the country's energy is produced. It's where 60% of the shipping goes through the Mississippi out Louisiana. We have enormous wealth and resources that we could be utilizing for the actual working class of our state. And that is our push, is to push the GROW Act, get climate change addressed, push for alternative energy jobs. Solar alone is an $8 billion industry in Louisiana, potential industry. We've already been talking to solar producers who want to break into this market and who just want a level playing field. And we think that economic justice and social justice go hand in hand. We need to fight for a minimum wage, an increase in the minimum wage, which hasn't changed since 2009. And we expect people to work 2, 3 jobs with no help in terms of daycare or good schools, and so therefore putting our future families at risk. Another issue that reason that I'm running is that Louisiana is overrepresented by Republican politicians, in my opinion. When the majority of the House is Democrat and we don't have a Democrat in Congress, we're not getting anything for our state. Clay Higgins is up there just as a placeholder for Republican policies, Republican ideologies, pushing oil and gas product, but getting nothing for our state because he's not in the majority. And I would say that Louisiana, it's time for Louisiana. Now, that was all I had in my preconceived notes. I'm happy to take any questions. No questions? Or I could just ramble on for another 10 minutes if you prefer.
I have one for you.
Okay.
If elected to Congress, what will be your first priority once you're taking seat?
My first priority would probably be finding an office. But my second priority, that's a joke. My first priority, obviously, is to get things for Louisiana. So the first push is to network with other Congress people and push for the minimum wage increase. If I had to pick the first issue that we're going to start fighting for right alongside with existing legislators, there's already bills going through for pushing the minimum wage. Now, cost studies have shown that cost of living hovers around $12 an hour would be an adequate living wage that I've seen. The national push is for $15 an hour. Somewhere in there, I imagine there's room to negotiate, but we definitely need people to, if you work a full-time job, you should make a living wage.
Mr. Harrison, I'm Bobby Holmes, local attorney. I have a question for you.
Yes.
In Washington news, we see that the center of America is essentially dying. Everybody is a race to the right and a race to the left. If elected and you go to Washington. So now we're good. So as I was saying, of course, as we said, there's a race to the right and to the left in both parties now. We don't really have that center of America. We always had moderate politics. If elected and you go to Washington, who will you caucus with? Do you consider yourself more of a progressive or are you a moderate Democrat? How would you classify or align yourself when you go to D.C.? Because you have different interests within the left wing of the party.
Absolutely. That is a good question because I am and sort of always have been extremely moderate on business. I'm a former business owner myself. I've had a printing company, I had a construction company, and I had a concrete company, 2 of which did well and 1 got hit by the Bush recession. So mixed results, but normal middle class upbringing, I would assume. So my politics are more or less moderate in terms of fiscal conservatism. I'm extremely left if you have to pick a side on human rights issues. I'm very progressive. I am absolutely an ally for the the minority community, LGBT community. All human rights to me are the reason the Constitution was written, more so than business. Where I differ somewhat from some Democrats is that I do acknowledge that business owners are Americans too. I try not to use the buzzwords of like the Bernie Sanders wing, but because most businesses, I forget the exact statistic, but I think it's like 80% of all businesses are small business. They're just regular Americans who are, hire a few employees and trying to make a living, try to get ahead, as did I and as did all of you. So I'm very progressive on social issues, pretty middle of the road on business issues. I think that extremely successful corporations should pay taxes, which kind of differs us from this area. I think if ITEP reined in some of these oil companies and didn't keep renewing these leases without getting tax return, the working class of Louisiana would be better off. So that's basically that approach that I take, that if we each pay our fair share, infrastructure, education, healthcare all rises, and then therefore the region becomes more successful.
My question is, when you talk about the raising of minimum wage, as a small business owner, and we're coming out of a pandemic, and a lot of these businesses are struggling, a lot of them are closing. As far as where do you think the small business are going to produce the money from? Because right now, a lot of them are in these different loans, SBA loans, EIDL and all this. This money has to be paid back. Okay, right now they don't have a lot of business running through through these small businesses. That's why some of them are closing. So my question is, how do you, or where do you think the small businesses would be able to raise the minimum wage? I mean, we're already struggling right now because taxes is, enormous for a small business.
Amen. And then I've seen several local stores in my DeQuincy area, even though the pandemic's only been six months now, 5 months, that are already closing. And there are going to be repercussions. The first and foremost of that, and this is a very complex issue, as we all know, so it's going to be a complex answer. I apologize. I'm not going to give you a soundbite. We actually think about these things, and I'll give you an answer. First thing we have to realize is that we are in the grips of a pandemic, and we have to blame that. A lot of people blame the governor or their congressman or the president for not doing this or that, but we first and foremost have to remember that we're in a pandemic. We have to react to that. So public safety should be first and foremost in our mind. Same with reopening of schools, which is another contentious topic these days. That being said, I don't think any legislative body is going to go in January and say, all right, 50% of all small businesses were wiped out in the last year. Let's raise the minimum wage right now. I think the first thing, to amend the answer to Tasha earlier, I think the first thing we're probably going to be doing, and it's hard to forecast, is repairing this damage, recovering from the pandemic. And there's no guarantee we'll even have a vaccine by the swearing in is in January of 2021. So we may still be in the grips of. However, the studies I've seen that show, whenever you increase the minimum wage, that money doesn't go into somebody's mattress. It does go into the economy. More people can shop at your store. I don't know what your business is, but for example, shop at the store or take Uber rides. Those are also small businesses. The money tends to flow into the economy. Rent gets paid on time, so those people can buy more buildings and more affordable housing. A minimum wage increase doesn't just benefit Wall Street. It actually benefits on the ground Louisiana. And I think if we're in that recovery phase of the pandemic, which in my belief we will be, it's going to be a phased-in effort. I would just like to see us actually do something rather than talk about, let's raise the minimum wage. Well, we'll wait 2 years because we have this. It's been a long time coming already, and the cost of living is far exceeding the minimum wage. I don't know anybody who works one minimum wage job and can survive, let alone healthcare costs, and which is a whole separate issue, especially for business owners. The way the ACA is structured, if healthcare costs go up, your costs go up, and we'd like to address that. But that's, again, another complicated issue. Somebody wants to ask me about healthcare. I could probably finish the final 20 minutes just talking about that.
I wanted to see what your thoughts were on criminal justice reform.
Okay.
Because in our society with that right now.
Criminal justice reform is a key issue for us. I'm from the have been arrested once class. I'm not a groomed politician who went to law school and went into public service and then just tried to make a living out of politics. I worked my entire life, and in 1987 I was arrested for marijuana possession. Now, being a white guy, I got a ticket and sent home. And I know of people, and I have met people who got arrested for a joint and spent a year in jail. So obviously there is something broken when you look at it, just even anecdotally. For me, criminal justice reform has to start with the entire structure of private prisons being able to donate to politicians thus perpetuating that cycle, keeping their own livelihood, and the legalization of cannabis. If cannabis is legalized across the board, one, not only does it boost the textile market with hemp being much more, it has 3 cycles a year as opposed to lumber, which takes 20 years, much more beneficial agricultural product, but then it removes all of these non-violent, pointless, harmless crimes, gets those people from, that school to prison pipeline, and gets people into productive society for a plant that has never killed anybody. It's caused no harm in history. Well, I won't say, it probably increased the stock of Domino's and Twinkies, but it hasn't harmed or killed anybody. So criminal justice reform is another key element that we're pushing, and then let's stop trying to control our people and let them, build their lives, get the education they need. Maybe it's trade school, maybe it's high school, and not go in and out of jail because of a plant.
My question is this. I know you ran a few years ago. What have you done different? What are you planning on doing this time that you felt as though you didn't do when you ran a couple of years ago?
Okay. That's a very valid question. That gave me an introduction to politics. I ran in 2018 against Higgins, got 5% of the vote. 13,477 votes, I counted. And at that time, what that taught me is how the political election system actually kind of works behind the scenes. A lot of it is apparent from the outside, but a lot of it isn't. And a lot of it is networking, and it comes down to with whom you want to network. Do you want to network with people trying to make a difference, or do you want to network with rich donors who are going to put you in there because you're going to vote the way they want? And obviously, this time, over the last 3 years, we've grown social media so much that alone has created a fame and a fundraising base for our campaign, because Higgins is such a useless bad apple. I'm trying to think of a nice way to not insult him, but insult him. He's a party placeholder. He does what the RNC tells him. That's why he was put there. He achieved fame through YouTube, and they put him there because he'll vote however Scalise wants, who runs the delegation here in Louisiana. So this time what we're doing is we've met all the people, or are meeting all the people who tell us how to meet the people we need to meet. And once you meet somebody one-on-one, they can realize that you're really just running for the right reasons, in my opinion, and I hope you'll agree, that we are trying to change a corrupt system. We're trying to fight back against a corporate donor system that puts politicians into place, and therefore they have no impetus or reason to listen to the voter. They'll make noises as they do, and they virtue signal, and Clay Higgins will stand there waving a Bible, which is kind of disgraceful, but he doesn't act in accordance with those signals. We just want somebody who is responsive to the voters to get the legislation that people actually need. Is my time up?
No, not yet.
One more question.
Okay.
We're making sure Tasha gets her steps in.
See,
You spoke briefly regarding healthcare, and gracious knows with the pandemic in place, and we're seeing various trends, particularly disproportionately impacting the Black minority community. Can you share with us kind of your thoughts on healthcare immediately, then overarching more medium and long term?
All right, that is a good question, because I could probably fill 5 minutes and just doing bullet points, but working backwards. Long term, I think the United States owes it to its citizens. And to me, it's in the preamble to the Constitution where it says promote the general welfare. I think ultimately we have to work towards universal health care. That is where I'd like to see the U.S. end up within 10 years. Whether you call it Medicare for all, whether they augment the Affordable Care Act, however they do, and I've seen at least 6 different plans, and I'm sure there are many more, we have to get there. Now, in the short term, I would like to see, kind of like what Bell Edwards did when he was first elected, a Medicaid expansion to make sure that everybody during this pandemic gets the critical care and the preventative care and the expansion of testing that I know we all know we need. I would like to see that passed so that healthcare is, at least in the short term, not an issue in terms of the disproportionately affected. As you said, that our black population, I think, is making up 70% of the fatalities in the state when it's 30% of the population. And they used to think it was just the older group, was the elderly were the prime vulnerable, excuse me. But now that it's expanding, we don't know exactly what the vulnerabilities are. What we are seeing that is it because there's not equal access to health care for all. Is that adding to the mortality rate? And it raises that question. It did to me when I first saw those stats. Yes, in an immediate Medicaid expansion, I'd like to see everybody to have health care right now. I'd love to see national testing from this administration that's not quite sure what it's doing. I'd like to see contact tracing so that if we had done this back in January when there were 7 or 8 cases, obviously we all know we wouldn't be here now. We could have isolated it, kept it under control. And sorry, I was reliving January in my mind. Cassandra complex, a lot of us saw this coming and we warned about it and, please wear a mask. So that's I don't know if that answered the question, but that's kind of what I would push for. If I was in the governor's office right now, I'd be trying to cover everybody for healthcare at least under, like a FEMA emergency relief or something. I'd like to see an immediate response. And then in the long term, yeah, we're going to work towards universal healthcare. There's 33 industrial countries in the world that have it. Nobody's ever given it back. So it obviously works to me. I'm better at giving answers than I am prepared.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
So on the I-10 bridge, what did you feel about that, and what do you think if you're for it, where will we get the funds for it?
It's a good question. It's where every politician in our state goes to die, is the I-10 bridge. Everybody gets up here and promises we're going to have a new I-10 bridge. And I'd love to say the same thing, have a new I-10 bridge. I know the state has already set aside the funds for, and Clay Higgins, because he's a Republican, has no cachet to get the federal matching funds. That's the short of why it's happening. We need Louisiana to be represented to get those federal funds down there, and we need to get it done quick. And not only should we replace the I-10 bridge, which we should because it's at 6% efficiency, we should double the size of it. This is I-10 corridor all along the south, from Florida to Los Angeles, is a critical superhighway for travel in the United States, and more importantly, the moving of goods. So the federal government really should be looking at it closely, and I know I am. That's part of my GROW Act that I talked about. That corridor is kind of overlooked by the North because they don't think about where they get their gasoline. The 25% of it comes from Louisiana. And we need to stand up for ourselves and say, yeah, we need these federal matching funds. And not only that, we should double the size of the bridge while we're at it. And it shouldn't be a toll bridge, because I don't think you should charge people to go to work.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all. I hope I answered your questions.